What's going on, everyone? Okay, so for today's video we're going to be installing a 2-inch lift on the back of this Toyota Tacoma 4-wheel drive. Now this truck already has spring spacers installed, but the customer is complaining about how squeaky the rear springs are. These aren't ideal. These do get the the vehicle up in height, but they can cause the springs to fatigue and flatten out, and these springs are starting to squeak really bad. So what we're going to replace them with is we're going to replace them with a set of new lifted leaf springs that do have some overload springs that come along with them. Now we're going to have to replace the U-joints. These are typically one-time use, as well as install bushings on the eyelets of each of the leaf springs. The nice thing with these are cut in half style, so this will save us probably 3 or 4 hours trying to get the old ones out or press solid ones in. We're also going to work on installing these little Delrin spacers to drop down the drive shaft so that the drive shaft has a proper angle. Now as we're doing this, we are on a 2-post lift. One of the things to note when we're doing this is we are going to have to drop this axle down, which, this being a pickup truck, this is where most of the weight is. So we need to make sure that the lift points are real nice and sturdy, and that we don't run the risk of tipping the truck off. The other thing that we are going to utilize is we're going to utilize pull jacks, and these are going to support our differential assembly and allow us to drop the springs down. Now we're going to have to start with undoing the U-bolts and all of the cabling so that everything can drop down a little bit, because we are going to have to drop this down a couple inches to be able to get the old springs out and fish the new springs in. So we'll get the wheels, tires off and start breaking everything loose.
So we removed the wheels and tires and situated the pull jacks under the axle shaft as wide as possible to make the rear axle stable while it's under the truck and disconnected. We then went through and disconnected all the bracketry for the brake lines and the electrical for the speed sensors, and then went and started breaking loose all of the swing hangers and bracketry for the leaf springs. We got lucky, it being a California truck. This came out really nice and easy.
All right, so we got our old springs out, comparing that to our new springs. Our old springs are fairly flat. Again, the lift blocks add extra force and can flatten out these springs, so this will be a nice upgrade to this vehicle. Now, we're taking out a spring pack that's got 3 leaves. The new spring pack has 4, as well as 2 additional helpers where the old spring has 1. So this will be a little bit stiffer, and it will take a little bit of time to break in. Something to note on this particular spring is there is a front and a rear, like most leaf springs, and they're going to dictate that with markings on the front here. So the plus sign is for the driver's side, and the arrow is pretty self-explanatory for the front of the truck. And the what looks like a 0 is for the passenger side. So one of the other things to note too is we got to make sure we reinstall these factory bump stops. They just wedge in with the new U-bolts. So what we're going to do now is we will install the bushings, and that'll just be literally sliding them in and sliding the collars in. We are going to use a little bit of white lithium grease to help with the install on these. Usually these bushing kits will come with some lubricant. These ones didn't, but you know, we'll install a little bit of lubricant on them. They should install nice and easy, and then we can reinstall the springs. The only other thing too is we got to swap over the swing shackles. That's why I like to leave the springs where we took them off, so that we can get them in the right orientation and everything's good.
So with these 2-piece bushings, it makes it a lot easier. The factory 1-piece bushings require quite a lot of effort to get in and out of the leaf springs. So having them be 2-piece made the job a lot quicker. At this point, Kyle and I both used the pull jacks to equally lift up the axle shaft so that it contacted the bottom of the spring perches. We then installed the new U-bolts and then kind of snugged them up with the gun. At this point, with the shackles all bolted in, we removed the pull jacks and then dropped it down to torque it with jack stands.
All right, we have our new springs installed. We reinstalled all the brake bracketry and torqued that up to where it should be. Everything is loose though, so with the exception of the U-bolts, we can tighten those up with it under pressure on the pull jack. And then we need to go through and torque the bushing ends. So the swing link end, plus the front frame end and the shock absorber bushing here on the bottom. We're gonna do with the vehicle under load. So we've lowered the vehicle down and the front wheels are on the ground, and we're just starting to get a gap between the rack arm and the frame, because we have the axle supported with jack stands. So this will simulate the wheels and tires being on the vehicle and the full weight of the vehicle being installed. So now we can torque up the bushings front and rear. This will torque the bushings to where they're kind of in a compliant area with the vehicle at ride height, so that when you go up or down with the suspension, that's when the bushings will bind, not being bound up right now. So we'll go through and torque these to spec and then get the wheels and tires back installed. All right, so our next step is we're actually going to drop this center joint for the drive shaft down a little bit. We have these spacers that are going to go in between the drive shaft and the bracket. And we're going to have to install longer bolts. The idea with this is this will put the drive shaft a little bit better operating angle and less likely to fatigue these U-joints. So this is one of those things that's really important. If your truck has a little bit of a vibration, this is one of the ways to correct it.
Having an extra set of hands really helps with this job. These were torqued to factory specifications.
All right, so we got everything torqued up. The drive shaft's re-angled down so that we have a better angle with that, and the release springs are in. This already has a 2.5 inch lift in the front with spacers. And then now we have the new leaf springs installed on the rear. These will settle with a little bit of driving. Usually they're going to be pretty pumped up off the first couple miles. So the vehicle will have to drive, only a couple hundred miles, and then it'll level out a little bit more. But it looks pretty good, and it is ready to go back on the road. Thank you for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.